Just very briefly, I rise in support of this bill, which I think injects really important clarity into zero-hours contracts. My honourable friend is quite correct to say that zero-hours contracts are here to stay and that they occupy an important role within the British labour market. Certainly, they can offer a degree of flexibility to students, particularly to older workers who may want to have complete flexibility with their hours, and also to people with caring responsibilities, particularly parents. One of the advantages, for example, in the NHS, the bank model, which is just another term for what is effectively a zero-hours contract, is the advantage, for example, of being able to take school holidays without having to apply to your boss and request the time off in the usual way. So I understand why they are attractive, but we also have to be honest as a House. Zero-hours contracts do exist in a grey zone between full employment rights and the status of an independent contractor, and we know that they have caused particular problems. That's why the government has already legislated to ban exclusivity clauses where they applied, and also we've seen really high-profile cases reaching the Supreme Court, the Uber case, the Deliveroo case. Again, that contested grey zone as to whether they were independent contractors or whether they were workers with basic rights. And I just wanted to say this about the requirement that is inherent to this bill, that there will be at least some terms and conditions, or at least there'll be the right to request some terms to the zero-hours arrangement that will give some predictability. Whatever the advantages of flexible working, we know that there are some employers who use zero hours on a quasi-exploitative basis. There have been some really actually grim stories that I've read in the newspapers, not recently, but of people who, for example, travelling a really long way by bus, arriving at the gates of their employer only to be told there was no work for them that day. That is clearly not an acceptable situation. This bill seeks to amend the Employment Rights Act, and if you open that Act and you read Section 1 of the Act, what does it say? It requires all employers within the first 2 weeks of employment to provide an employment contract which sets out the days you're required to work, the rate you're going to be remunerated at, what you're going to be paid and when, what your basic duties are, what you'll get for overtime. What my point is really, at the heart of all employment relationships is the requirement that people who come to work have a basic idea of what is expected of them, how they'll be paid, and what they are reasonably expected to do. And it can't be right that we allow, even in this grey zone, with all the flexibility that I otherwise support, a system to exist where people literally have no idea from week to week, day to day, whether they're going to be required to work, and if so, how much. So I do think that this is and it also actually goes to another point in employment law, which is really, really important, that whilst of course it is correct and right that an employer can consider what it requires its members of staff to do and can set their duties and their working hours, they don't have unilateral rights to vary the employment contract in any other context. And therefore it seems right to me that where it is reasonably possible for them to do so, a worker should have the right to request predictability, and that the burden should be on the employer either to say, yes, we can offer you some predictability and here is what it looks like, something that would come pretty close to a standard contract of employment, or to say, such is the nature of our work that predictability is impossible in any circumstance. And that at least then gives the worker the opportunity to know whether they can begin to plan their life around that job or whether they can't. But I do think this is a counterpoint to some of the exploitative practices which do linger at the uglier end of the zero contract world. And for that reason, I support it, and I support the private members' bill today. Yeah.